So actually, I can start a little bit. So back when, back in the really fun days when you're starting up a business, you're sitting in the room with yourself and one other person, and one of you is the alpha player, and the alpha players are always trying to train the other person. You need to know everything I know, because we'd be a lot better if you just knew what I know. And so I think it's interesting how training starts. You get a third person, everybody's kind of picking on the third person. The first two guys are now tired of each other. They're working on the third person, and I think it's kind of interesting the way I look at how people absorb information and how they become better employees is largely the effect of a desire, wanting, and really wanting to do something better. It really doesn't matter what it is that you're wanting to do better, but you're working on trying to do better. But there are different styles of people and different ways to kind of bring people into the process in your organization to make it easier to work with them. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that as soon as. So this is kind of walking through the process. And you guys, this should be interactive, so please stop me whenever you feel like asking any questions. But what we do is go through today a whole lot more complex process, both internally and externally when we hire people. And the biggest difficulty that almost anybody has is everybody interviews well. I mean, the best sales pitch that anybody ever gives is in their interview. And then you wonder, well, after the person, you hire this person, you go, well, who was that was in the interview that I hired? They didn't show up for the job. And then you're trying to figure out, well, what can I do to fix this? And if you're a bleeding heart like me, you sit with the people forever trying to figure out how to fix them, and it's very hard to kind of take something that's broken and doesn't work and it's not a fit and make it fit. So through the process, we've learned a lot about the things that we need to do, and one of my favorite things, and I'll let you guys, does anybody know predictive index by any chance? No? Okay. So no, I can do it. I'm going to just give you guys each one of these, and you can be the person that is the predictive index person. These are live documents. They're all different. They're different people. They describe different attributes for the people. So when we bring people in, typically, I spilled some coffee on this, I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. We used to do what everybody else does. We like the people. We hire them. We don't like them. We don't hire them. We like their resume. We call their references. Who ever gave a bad reference? Seriously. I mean, you called up a reference and the reference said, no, I didn't like that person. That doesn't happen real often. So what we did is kind of took what we thought were industry standards for screening people. And one of them is we're all blessed with our own personality. So your personality you can't change your personality. It is what it is. And when I first got started with predictive index, I thought it was kind of a voodoo thing. So there are 85 different attributes that they track, and they've tracked for years and years. And the idea behind studying the attributes is to determine certain things about people so that you don't push them into roles that would not be comfortable roles for them. The way we used it initially is when we were working with the women who are incarcerated, we have them all take these tests. And I had this theory that if I had them focused and concentrated, they could do jobs that they really weren't suited for. And it turned out to be right because they're in a very focused environment. But if you leave them in those jobs too long, they'll fail. And if you leave them, or they'll get unhappy with themselves, or they'll start questioning themselves. And what this does is it studies 6 main attributes. And the first is authoritative. And if you look at the little graph, I can read these graphs. The very top point is the A point, or authoritative. And if it's over that fulcrum on the right side, it says that you are an authoritative type. And authoritatives are fun to deal with sometimes. So I'm an authoritative. Molly's an authoritative. Salespeople tend to be very authoritative. There are different kinds of sales. So I'm an authoritative salesperson. Molly's an authoritative salesperson. They're also relationship salespeople. And I can read this because in a relationship salesperson, the second category, which is the B category, is related to people. And if it's on the right side of the fulcrum, on the right side of the fulcrum, it is someone who likes people. Well, people who like people are great, except for when they like people more than they like the discipline associated with the job they're trying to accomplish. And so if they put people over everything else, then what ends up happening is they get easily knocked off balance and going down a track that they shouldn't be when they have a certain kind of job. So if you've got a person who is a real strong people person, they're a good relationship person. You want them to work with your customers, your clients, in your market. You don't necessarily want them to be salespeople unless they have the ability to close. And in order to have the ability to close, they have to have the third category. And the third category is C. And if that's on the left side of the fulcrum, what that says is they have a high degree of urgency. So in Molly's case, my case, very high degree of urgency. So we're trying to get things done, and we're probably not real patient about it. And that's good in certain types of positions. It's bad in positions that require patience. So for instance, an HR person has to have a degree of patience. And if you're the person in your business that's wearing all those hats, now you need to be able to manage yourself to have patience with the people that you're working with in order to make the right hiring decisions and be balanced in how you deal with them going through time. And so you find in smaller companies, entrepreneurs can be very tough. And entrepreneurs want to get stuff done, and they have a high degree of urgency, very authoritative, but they want to be nice to their employees. It doesn't always work out that way because, the different tasks that you're trying to do kind of clash with each other. So it's almost like you have to have therapy using a PI to understand when to kind of hold yourself back and when to allow yourself to push forward. The fourth category, which is interesting, is it measures attention to detail. So in a lot of cases, in the attention to detail cases, and any one of you, since we have a relatively small group, if you give me your card and you want me to go back and take your PI, I'll send you an online. I got Leland to do it. I can tell you all about Leland. I can go back and give you a printout, and if you want to chat about it, I'll be happy to pick up the phone and talk to you about it. So if you want to learn more about it as it relates to yourself. So the only time another anecdote, the only time in history in the prison system that I got what was called kited, which is somebody writing a complaint to the warden about something that you did, and one of the ladies complained about the fact that I was putting her personality on full display in front of everybody. And I was kind of thought about that for a moment before I stopped laughing. And your personality is on display. You can't hide. It's kind of hard to hide your personality. This just gives you dials it in a little bit better. It makes it a little bit easier for you to understand. So you'll find people that are low authoritative and high detail. Those are people who are really, really good worker bees for you. They'll get the jobs done. They'll make sure the jobs are done correctly. They're team players. They're very, very interested in making sure the job is done right during the course of any given day or week. But they're challenging to some extent because what they need to know details in order to do things. So if you skip the details when you're working with people who are very, very detail-oriented, you'll freeze them up. So it happens to me all the time. I go in to talk to my IT people, and the IT people are all high detail. You need to know everything about everything in order to be able to do anything. So everything's in freeze mode, and I'm kind of like really frustrated. I need to get stuff done, and I can't wait for this. I've learned to be a lot more patient and attack detail people by using detail people to attack the detail people. So there are people who are mildly that way, but very decisive, will make a decision without knowing everything, and there are people who just can't move unless they know everything. Fifth category on here is intuitive or logical. So if you look at that little circle that's on the chart, it's either on the right or the left of the fulcrum at the bottom of the chart. And if it's on the right, it says the person's logical. If it's on the left, it says they're intuitive. Most people tend to be to the left. And what I say by most, that's 50%. It's not, dramatically most, but it is 50% of people tend to be intuitive. And this means that intuitive kind of trumps everything. Intuitive is you add up all these things and you get down to what does it really feel like to me? How do I make this decision? Where do I go next? Intuitives make that decision. Whereas people like Molly, who are logical, tend to look at things in very black and white. Don't want to get into the gray area. Don't want to get into the intuitive. Need to say, okay, we need to cut to the chase, get to the bottom line, and get the stuff done. It's very important to be able to understand the difference when you're dealing with people, because people who are logical and people who are intuitive will get into an apples and oranges argument over and over and over again for no really good reason. It's just that one's going one way and one's going the other way, and neither one's probably wrong in the discussion. It's just the way it is. Of course, the logicals always think that they're right about everything, so usually they are. Then there's this category called M-score. And an M-score is the amount of things that you can juggle at any given point in time. And so down at the bottom left, you'll see the M-score is some number. In this particular person, the M-score is 67. So a 67 as an M-score would be kind of solid employee, middle of the road, not all over the place. You won't have to chain them to their work in order to get the work done. They'll be focused enough to be able to get it done. And then you get people like me. I'm like a 114 M-score. So I'm like over here and over there and in the middle and then back again. And I'm not the easiest person to employ, which is why I always make myself the CEO. And you find a lot of people who get into those positions are that, and honestly are definitely difficult to harness or manage. My head of operations has a very similar M-score, but his personality type is much tamer. So he doesn't get into as much trouble as I get into. So these are things that are really, really good to kind of look at when you're hiring people and when you put people into jobs, because as you're managing people in jobs and you're looking at how their personality types react, if you play to how you think they are and what their actual behaviors seem to be to you, as opposed to being more precise about understanding them, you might be making the wrong call. And you might be thinking they're not thinking the right way when they think the right way. It's just different. And so I've experienced this over and over and over again. So the prison ends up being an environment where you can take somebody who has massively high detail, is a very shy person, and you can put them on the phone and have them talk to an executive in very complex terms about very complex products. The reason you can do it is because you train them so deeply to know so much of the detail that when they get into the conversation, the shyness or their inability to kind of control everything is overtaken by their knowledge. So it makes this so much easier to kind of function. And this happens across, almost any kind of job type, whether it's, an administrative assistant, it's an HR person, it's a salesperson, it's a finance person. Across the board, it applies. So there are exceptions. So the PI will tell you that this represents about 15% of what you're looking at when you're looking at a person. But personality plays a big part in what we all have to deal with when we're dealing with other humans. So it's an important thing I've thought over the years. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? I've given you these random PIs to look at, and these are actually live people who work for us. Go ahead.
When you take something like this and give it to somebody, and I don't know if you do that, you give it to them, or if you share this with them when you talk to them.
Absolutely.
It would seem that it would be a good starting point for their weaknesses to kind of help them, especially since you've got kind of a controlled environment with the ladies, that if you could help them to build up their weaker point.
Actually, it's an incredibly good point. What it does is it's hard to change people's weaknesses. It's really easy to make them stronger at the things that they're good at. So we do, or at least I do exactly, I focus on the opposite, because I want somebody to be 100% of who it is that they are all the time. I don't want them to get them from 50% to 60% of what they can't be or what they're struggling with, because then they're never going to get to feel really good about themselves.
Have you done any post-tests like this?
Well, this is... So your personality is pretty locked in pretty early in life. The things that cause your personality to change, traumatic events. So what we have found is, particularly for the incarcerated women, that those PIs can change after they get out, because it's a traumatic event to get incarcerated, and it's kind of traumatic to re-enter the world. But by and large, 75% don't change at all over time. Anybody else? Any other questions? Sure.
Are you familiar with the DISC profile?
Sure. I'm familiar with all of these.
So this would be similar.
Very similar.
Yeah, so the A would be similar to D,
right.
The B to I.
Yep.
The C to the C, or the C to the S, and the D to the C.
Yeah, they're very, they do both do similar kinds of things. I like this. DISC is good. I can't, I've done it. I don't do it as, we adopted this version, and it works well for us. But DISC is every bit as good, and there are other variations on this. They all kind of focus on similar kinds of things. Go ahead.
You mentioned something about the left and the right side of it being, and I didn't quite follow you there.
There's a fulcrum. If you look in the very middle of the bottom, and actually in each one of them there's a fulcrum. And the left really measures urgency and lack of detail, or urgency and if the let me see if I can describe this correctly. So if the A is on the right side, if the top dot is on the right side, and it's authoritative, that says the person is authoritative. If it's on the left side, it says they're not. The B is people. If it's on the right side, it says that they are people-oriented. If it's on the left side, it says they're not. The C is urgency. If it's on the right side, it says that they're patient and not urgent. If it's on the left side, it says that they are. And then the D, if it's on the right side, it says they're high detail. If it's on the left side, it says that they're low detail. Make sense?
The three categories, how they perceive themselves versus how they actually.
Oh, you're way too smart, aren't you? That's exactly. We don't deal as much with the perception, but you'll see in some of these. In fact, you'll probably see in all of them. These are people who are currently incarcerated. The second category is the first category is how they are. The second category is how they would like to be. So how they would like to be perceived. And if there's a dramatic difference between the two, it says that there's a lot of conflict in the person. And in these, probably every single one of them has a high degree of conflict because they are people who are incarcerated and there's not that much consistency. But if you look at somebody's, mine has a little conflict in the middle. It's just I'm a very high authoritative, but I actually would like to be a nicer person. So it says it in the second one, and I say, well, I want to be more of a relationship sales guy instead of a high authoritative sales guy. Go ahead.
What type of process do you take to arrive to this conclusion? Is that a test you're talking about?
You take 5 minutes and fill out a test, and it gives you this much information.
You just basically the person sits down and assesses themselves and who they are, answers some questions.
Yeah. Well, it's really checking boxes. It's do you think you're this or that, or how do you feel about this or that? And it goes through this kind of check and recheck to see whether or not you've answered the question differently at different points in time.
In the long run, do these prove to be fairly accurate? Do people assess themselves correctly? I guess is the question.
You cannot beat the test. You cannot beat the test.
The test usually will ask the same question in 5 different ways.
Right, exactly.
So that even though their mindset is this, and they're like, well, I want them to think this, and once they go through that 5 questions a different way, they've already told the truth.
That's basically it. You can't. The funny thing is, it's like the comment I made about personality. We uncovered this person's personality. No. This is who I am. I'm walking around. I don't have a PI on my chest, but I am who I am, and so is everybody in the room. And it's obviously not a bad thing. There's no such thing as, like, for instance, people used to think there's a bad PI and there's a good PI. There's no such thing as a good or a bad PI. There's no such thing as a good or a bad personality. So, go ahead.
So you mentioned that you prefer to maximize their existing strengths as opposed to trying to shore up their weaknesses.
Yes.
When you have performance reviews with your teammates, do you even identify those weaknesses and say, here, I think I'd really like to see some improvement here, or do you not even go there and just say, hey, we just really want to free you in this particular area. We're going to put people around you that are good at what you're not good at. Like, how do you approach that when you're in an actual performance review?
My director of HR would love you. I'm the worst at performance review. I'm kind of almost like, the anti-performance review person, although I preach it. I do preach it. I think it's a very important thing. When I talk to people, I tend to focus on strengths because it doesn't, unless I'm being the bad Jim, and then I'm dealing with generally my direct reports, and I'm kind of treating them to the worst version of my personality, that will focus on their weaknesses, like their golf swing or something. You need to improve this. But it's a great point. I think our teams will talk about how you can improve areas that are areas of weakness that are needed for the job. So kind of answering the question over here is, if what it is that you do on the job is a weakness for the job, then you need to be able to improve that, even if it is something that you don't necessarily do that well if you want to be good in that job. So that would be maybe my best short answer to that question. Anybody else? Okay, I have a lot of fun with this thing because it's when you can actually look at somebody and you can look at something like this, which looks goofy, it's goofy. This is the person, and you can tell, based on their behavior and based on other people's behaviors, that this is accurate. You'll see very often when I'm teaching classes. You see very often that how people seat themselves. People I've never talked to ever in my life, and they'll seat themselves next to people who are either exactly the same or exactly the opposite. See, it's actually astounding how that happens. And their friends will be very often exactly the same or exactly opposite. And it's an interesting characteristic of the test. But it has proven to be true, particularly, I think, in typing sales jobs or executive jobs or typing technical jobs. Has tended to be very, very true. Finance jobs tend to be very, very true. Finance people don't have high detail. No bueno. Not a good thing.
I wanted to add that this is a very good model to go by with also because there's a lot of people that don't know what they would be good at. I have 2 employees in particular that I manage that they said, oh, I can never call collections. I wouldn't be good at collections. I wouldn't do this. And they have that perfect personality for it, but they never thought that they could do it. And with some tweaking and some training and to bring out that personality, they're the best collection callers that we got.
Yep.
They're awesome about it. They're caring, but they're also firm and detailed, and they're good listeners. One key to collections is to be a good listener.
Yep.
And so this test would clue you in that they have that in them, and you might have to bring it out. So I think that's a good quality.
Well, it also, to that point, which I think is a really good point, a lot of people don't even know about themselves. Self-awareness is something that is not always the easiest thing in the world to kind of deal with. So when you go through this, it does help you kind of understand, strengths, weaknesses, and whatever. And a lot of what you do after that is up to the individual. So in your case, if you can point out, you are pretty good at these kinds of interactions. You're very good at kind of controlling these type. It's clear to me that you can do it, and now you kind of start to create a model for how they go about doing it, and find very quickly that people do rise to that game.
Self-esteem too, because I have one girl in particular that she's my right-hand person. That's who I go to when I'm gone or whatever. Everybody goes to her. And when she first started, she was real timid and, are you sure this is right? Are you sure? Are you sure? And now she's just on it. But we had to bring it out of her.
Yeah, there are some other interesting kinds of types. So they have names for the types of PIs and there's one called altruistic service, who is, if you ever, and everybody has altruistic service employees, but when you get an altruistic service employee, they're like gold. They're never going to be really the very best in the world, but they're always going to be team player. They're always going to move the ball forward. They're not going to be making waves in the system. They're always trying to work with their team. That's a great one. The relationship sales, and not Molly, but they use a term for relationship sales, and it's called friendly assassin. And what that really means, it's true too, is these people can be the nicest people in the world, but their goal in life is to get business, to close deals. Where they fail sometimes is because they're generally so nice, they have a tendency to talk themselves out of orders. So those are kind of interesting characteristics. So PI is great. I could spend forever talking about PI, but I would, if you give me a card, I will have somebody send you the PI if you want to take a look at your own, and we'll have you go through the exact same test. And if you want to talk about it, we'll send you the output. If you actually want to use these guys, we'll point you in the direction of how to go about using it. I'm not selling PI, but I do like the instrument because I think it's very, very easy to understand and very easy to use and very accurate.
And sometimes, yes, our clients take the PI also. It gives you a different frame of reference on how to deal with them.
We're one of the most visited companies in, I think, the world for our size. And one of my fun things is when executives from other companies come in, and they're all stiff and they're walking into a correctional facility for the first time in their life, and I make them sit down and take this, and then I spend the rest of the time harassing them about their PI. By the time they get out, they're very comfortable with everything. Anyway, other things that we've done over time. So I talk a lot about being an entrepreneur, but as you grow a business, we're 20 years in business. I've got roughly 600 employees. We've got major clients, big IT systems, lots and lots of process involved in the business. What happens to the poor entrepreneur who, just wants to get the next deal, who still just wants to get the next deal, is that you have to go through steps. So in business, you have to go through all kinds of steps. The number one thing that we haven't done as well as we could have done over time is onboarding. Onboarding, I don't care if you're one person hiring another person. Onboarding is a really, really key thing to getting people in to work with you, understanding what the jobs are, and to set the expectations firmly from the outset. And what we've done, I think, extremely well is started to take people through a much more effective kind of onboarding process, very disciplined, very black and white. Here's who we are, here's what we expect, here are the potential security issues with things like data and internet usage and all the other types of things that companies work about. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
I think the best experience is being able to shadow someone. So I think one of the benefits for me, or where I've learned so quickly, is by getting exposure to Jim or other executives on our team and just staying near the places where it's happening the right way. So if you're training an employee and you want them to model your behavior, or maybe not some of it, someone else who has a more disciplined approach, I think the best way that you learn, and part of our onboarding process, is to sit with someone else who's been doing it or who does it well, and it becomes kind of the immersion model that we talked about earlier. I think that's the best case. You can only learn so much from a trainer, but sitting next to someone doing it is where I learned the most.
So you start, I think the good thing about this is you start working through the building process of bringing somebody in to be part of the fabric of your company, and understanding as much as you can about them up front. We even have a test. In certain cases, we give a test that's from Predictive Index called PLI, and it's really about kind of testing a person's ability to handle complex information. And so we'll measure that, and if it's the type of job that we need the person in where they have to score high on the test, then we'll hire them if they score high, if everything else stacks up. We will also go that deep. How about anybody in the room from the point of view of onboarding? Did anybody want to chat about any of the aspects of their organization and onboarding? Okay. We talked a little bit about the values. coming again from a startup mentality, you make a lot of assumptions, particularly smaller companies make a lot of assumptions that people understand things like values. I think it's critical to companies to have a proposed set of values or a concrete set of values that they operate by. I've listened to other executives talk about this, and some companies now have gone to the point where you can have, like I said in the other room, you can have perfect performance, but if you don't follow the values that are set by the company, you can be more of a distraction than you're worth keeping, and that's a hard thing to do. But it is. I've seen it again and again where you let stuff like that go because the person outperforms, and they end up being a cancer in the organization, and it needs to be removed fairly quickly. Trial and probationary periods. When we went to look for a location in Europe, Europe is very much into everything is a trial until it's no longer a trial. You're on probation for 6 months. You don't qualify for anything until you're 6 months on the job. Once you're 2 years in the job, though, it's very difficult to let an employee go in Europe. You have to do some pretty serious damage in order for that to take place. It's becoming a little bit that way in the U.S. So in every company, I would suggest that you have trial or probationary periods for employees, and then it's very clearly written that that's the case. If you don't do that, you're going to end up in situations where somebody thinks that they're doing a good job, you think that they're horrible, and they're wrecking your company, and they just don't get it. And you end up in either lawsuits or really unfriendly situations. Go to the next. Like I said earlier, I think the training thing, I keep emphasizing that because I do it myself. I mean, I can't operate in our business, which is constantly changing, without constantly going through refreshers. And I think it's true in every business. And it doesn't really matter what place you're in the business. So if you're expanding your business in this space, it's going to be the degrees of separation between the very large companies and companies starting up in a new space is not that great. It really is not that great. You have to do a lot of the same things and think a lot the same way, and you have to have creative people doing creative things in order to be successful. I mean, I was talking, maybe it was you. There's a lot of different ways to make money. There's a lot of different ways to be effective at making money. There's a lot of different ways to lose money, too. So making everything work in the best possible manner in your organization by working it constantly is an ethic that I think is extremely important to work with. In our business, industry certifications like being able to run certain kinds of technology platforms like Salesforce or Marketo or Eloqua or any of the other types of things, very, very important. And then I think encouraging people like using things like Coursera and allowing people to have access and do courses at work or whatever. It doesn't cost you anything except for cost you the fact that the employee has to sit there while they're working on their course. So it's something you need to think about, but it's a benefit to working in your company. And then we do tuition reimbursement, which I think it's very important to encourage your employees to get education, and no matter at what stage. So this deck was done by my head of training and head of marketing. So the group discussion. Any thoughts on onboarding that you guys want to discuss? I think you guys like the more concrete stuff like PLI and PI. Company values? Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, is the assumption that you have maybe 85% of your workforce is women, is that accurate? Or is it
it's probably 80.
80%?
Yeah.
So I'd ask this question if you had 80% of your workforce as men as well. What challenges does it present to have that large a concentration of any one gender?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. Women are very different to manage, to all the women in the room. I spent the first half of my career managing men, and then the second half managing women, being managed by women. It's probably a much better way of putting it. So women are much easier to deal with from a team perspective, because women will come together and work together to get the job done. Some cases with men, it tends to be very individual. They're running off and trying to do their own things. You got to kind of push harder to get them in place, to get them to do things. I mean, the truth is women operate much better in a more empathetic, kinder, nicer environment. Men do not operate better in an empathetic, kinder, nicer environment. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. Men need to be pushed, almost like a football team. And so I look at it very, very differently. Managing women, I turn over aspects of the business to the women that I would not easily turn over to men, because I know how they will get together and make it work. In kind of another way to answer that is when you're managing one specific gender, or have a lot, you have to be careful about how you deal with the other gender. So, because you have a tendency, in fact, in the early days when we had really 95% women, there was so much focus on the women that the men in the business kind of felt like, well, do they always just get everything? And so we've kind of morphed into a more balanced approach to that. So it's a really good question. It is very different. I believe, if you look at stuff like diversity, gender diversity, or any diversity is a really, really, really positive thing for organizations. I think they're going to run us out of here. Any other questions you guys have? You're going to run us out, right? Do you have any other questions? I don't think did I get through all the slides, or did I finish? Are we finished? Cool. Wow. Go ahead.
Just really quick, do you have you had one point about communicating company values? Mm-hmm. Looking at your company, I think not all aspects of the work are just really fun to do. What is a good way to communicate or to inspire passion for the cause and commitment to the company and you have a apparently very dedicated staff, from what I can see. How do you communicate that?
So, okay, on a personal, that's another really, really good question. On a personal basis, I like to stay very involved in everything we do. So we deal with huge, complex projects, but it depends on people to make the projects work. If I stay involved and they know that I actually care about it, makes a big, big difference. So I'm a big believer in, I'm not going to ask you to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And I think when people see that, they respond to it differently. So people, probably the closing thing that I could say, and just jobs in general, people will work really hard for you if they like their job. If they like their job. And what I mean by like your job is you don't necessarily have to like all the attributes, but you have to feel like you're actually purpose-driven, and that you're part of an organization, that the organization actually cares about you, and the outcomes that you produce are valuable to the organization. And if everybody in your company thinks that way, you have the energy level just drives behaviors and drives outcomes. So it's a great question.